In 2008, a 93-year-old woman did something the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, and 40 years of Hollywood mythology never wanted to happen. She told the truth. Her name was Mayme Johnson. For 20 years, she was the wife of Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, the man the United States government spent decades trying to destroy. The man they called the Godfather of Harlem. The man whose name they turned into a synonym for heroin, for drugs, for the destruction of Black America's most iconic neighborhood. Her book was Harlem Godfather, The Rap on My Husband, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. The word rap in that title was not slang. It meant what it sounds like, a false charge, a frame, a setup. Because according to Mayme, the only person who shared Bumpy Johnson's bed, his dinner table, his secrets, and his life, her husband was a criminal. She never denied that. He ran gambling, he ran the numbers racket, he ran protection, he was violent, he killed people. Mayme admitted every single one of those things openly, without apology, in vivid detail. But heroin? That was the LI. That was the charge the government manufactured to take down the most powerful Black man in New York City and turn his own community against him. And when you understand who was running the government's war on drugs in 1952, and when you understand what Harry Anslinger and the Federal Bureau of Narcotics were actually doing to Black leaders, Black musicians, and Black communities during that exact period, Mayme's claim stops sounding like a widow's grief and starts sounding like a documented pattern of federal destruction. Here is what she exposed. The first thing Mayme's autobiography established, the foundation the entire book rests on, is what Bumpy Johnson's criminal operation actually was. It wasn't heroin, it was gambling. Bumpy Johnson was a numbers king. The numbers racket was Harlem's underground lottery, an illegal gambling operation that had been the financial backbone of Black Harlem since the 1920s. Thousands of people placed bets on three-digit numbers every day. The banks that took those bets made fortunes. From the mid-1930s until the day he died, the biggest bank in Harlem was Bumpy Johnson. Mayme detailed this entire world in the book. She dedicated an entire chapter to Madame Stephanie St. Clair, the legendary Queen of Numbers, explaining how Bumpy served as St. Clair's bodyguard and chief enforcer, how he waged a guerrilla war against Dutch Schultz's white organization to protect Black numbers operations, and how after Schultz was murdered in 1935, Bumpy took over everything. As Mayme wrote, Bumpy's crew of 9 waged a guerrilla war of sorts against Schultz's men, and over 40 people were killed or kidnapped during the conflict. When the dust settled, Bumpy struck a deal directly with Lucky Luciano, and this deal is critical to understanding the truth. The partnership between Bumpy and the Italian mafia was built on gambling, numbers, rackets, not drugs. The Italians got a cut of Harlem's gambling profits, and Bumpy maintained control of the streets. It was a business arrangement, and the product was the numbers racket. Mayme described how this operation functioned like a shadow government. If you wanted to do anything in Harlem, you went through Bumpy. Want to open a number spot on the avenue? Go see Bumpy. Thinking about converting your brownstone into a speakeasy? Check with Bumpy first. The police came to him to negotiate peace between street gangs. Politicians counted on him to deliver votes on election day. Even the Italian and Jewish syndicate knew he ran the place, although they learned that the hard way. The numbers racket employed hundreds of people, runners, collectors, accountants, and enforcers. It generated millions, and unlike heroin, it did not create addicts. It did not destroy families. People played the numbers the way they played cards. It was illegal, absolutely, but it was a community institution not a community poison. That distinction is everything, because when the government needed to take Bumpy down, they did not charge him with running numbers. Nobody hates a numbers king. They charged him with heroin, the one thing guaranteed to turn the community against him. Before you understand the setup, you need to understand why the government wanted Bumpy Johnson gone. Bumpy was not just a crime boss, he was a community institution, and that kind of power rooted in neighborhood loyalty rather than government authority, has always been perceived as a threat by American institutions. Mayme's book detailed this in granular, specific terms that no movie ever captured. Bumpy paid people's rent when they faced eviction, even complete strangers. He sent neighborhood children to college out of his own pocket. Every Thanksgiving, he organized turkey deliveries for families who could not afford a holiday meal. Every Christmas, he closed off entire streets and threw parties for the children. He told every young person he met the same thing: stay in school, get an education, don't do what I'm doing. As Mayme told All Hip Hop in her 2007 interview, Bumpy and his friend Junie Bird would tell the kids to go to school, to get an education, and not to follow his example. When Mayme described what Harlem was like with Bumpy alive, she painted a picture of a community that felt safe under his authority. He could just walk through the street and things would look a little better and there would be less crime, she said. He mediated gang disputes, he enforced a code of conduct on the streets, he protected local businesses from outside predators. And then there were the relationships. Mayme's autobiography revealed a social world that stunned readers. Bumpy's close personal friendships with Duke Ellington, Billie Holiday, Lena Horne, Joe Louis, Sidney Poitier, Bill Bojangles Robinson, and Sugar Ray Robinson. She described a man who read voraciously, from history to philosophy to literature, who earned the nickname the Professor, who played chess obsessively, who wrote poetry that was published in Harlem magazines, who quoted Shakespeare and dressed like a banker. This was the man the government was dealing with. Not some street corner thug they could sweep up in a routine arrest. This was a man who commanded more loyalty than any elected official in Harlem. A man who could walk into any restaurant on 125th Street and have the entire room stand up to greet him. A man who could organize a neighborhood, resolve disputes, deliver votes, and operate an entire underground economy, completely outside the control of any government agency. In 1952, the question for the federal government was not whether to take Bumpy Johnson down. It was how. This is where Mayme's story intersects with one of the most documented and disturbing patterns in American history: the federal government's systematic targeting of powerful black figures through drug charges. In 1952, the exact year Bumpy Johnson was indicted, the man running America's war on drugs was Harry J. Anslinger. Anslinger was the founding commissioner of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, and he had held that position since 1930. He would hold it until 1962, 32 years of unchecked power over who got charged with drug crimes and who did not. Anslinger's record of racial targeting is not speculation. It is documented historical fact. His bureau specifically targeted black musicians, black leaders, and black community figures using drug charges as weapons. His most famous target was Billie Holiday, who was Bumpy Johnson's personal friend, a woman Mayme described socializing with regularly. Anslinger went after Holiday relentlessly. He sent federal agents to follow her. He had her arrested repeatedly. He pursued her for years until her death. And here is the detail that reveals everything about how the system actually operated. When Anslinger discovered that Judy Garland, a white actress, was also a heroin addict, He simply wrote a letter to MGM suggesting she take longer vacations. A white addict received a polite suggestion. A black artist with political influence received federal prosecution and destruction. This was the system. This was the Bureau. This was the man running America's drug enforcement in 1952 when Bumpy Johnson, a powerful black leader who operated outside government control, who commanded community loyalty, who was close friends with some of the same black artists Anslinger was already targeting, was indicted for conspiracy to sell heroin. The 1950s were the height of Anslinger's power. During that decade, he pushed the Boggs Act of 1951 and the Narcotic Control Act of 1956 through Congress, both imposing increasingly savage, mandatory sentences for drug offenses. He did this by exploiting public fears about heroin use among black youth, by making claims about communist China flooding American cities with opioids, and by deliberately framing the narcotics crisis as a black community problem requiring aggressive federal intervention. The Federal Bureau of Narcotics maintained extensive secret files, detailed blacklists of suspected drug traffickers that outlined their connections, ethnic backgrounds, and organizational structures. The Bureau had direct connections to the CIA through shared personnel from the Wartime Office of Strategic Services. This was not some local police department making a routine bust. This was a federal intelligence apparatus with surveillance capabilities, unlimited authority, and a documented pattern of using drug charges to destroy black figures who were deemed threats to the existing order. And in 1952, that apparatus turned its full attention to Bumpy Johnson. The specific charge against Bumpy Johnson was conspiracy to sell heroin. Not dealing, not possession, not distribution, conspiracy. This distinction matters enormously. A conspiracy charge is the loosest and broadest weapon in federal law. You do not need physical evidence of drugs. You do not need to catch someone selling. You need witnesses, often other criminals facing their own charges, who will say anything in exchange for reduced sentences, and you need a narrative a jury will believe. Conspiracy charges have been the government's go-to tool throughout American history when they want someone gone but do not have direct evidence of the specific crime they are alleging. Bumpy publicly maintained he was framed. Multiple historical sources confirm that when the indictment came down, many people in Harlem believed him. This was not a case where the community accepted the verdict and moved on. People who knew Bumpy, who knew what his business actually was, who knew he ran numbers and gambling, did not believe the heroin charge. But the conviction accomplished exactly what it was designed to accomplish. Bumpy was sentenced to 15 years. He was sent to Alcatraz, the Rock, the fortress on the island in San Francisco Bay, where the government sent the inmates it wanted to erase from the world. He became inmate number 117. He spent a decade there. During that decade, the narrative was being written. Every newspaper report, every law enforcement file, every subsequent reference to Bumpy Johnson now included the words convicted heroin dealer. The numbers, king who kept Harlem safe, who paid people's rent, who sent children to school, was now officially a drug lord. The man who poisoned his own community. That is the genius of using a drug charge to destroy a black leader. A murder charge makes you feared. A gambling charge makes you colorful. But a heroin charge makes you the enemy of every mother who lost a child to addiction, every family ripped apart by the needle, every community ravaged by the epidemic tearing through black America. One charge, one conviction, and the most beloved man in Harlem became the most hated kind of criminal overnight. When Bumpy came home in 1963 after serving 10 years on the Rock, Harlem gave him a parade. Think about that for a moment. If the community truly believed he was a heroin dealer, the man who poisoned their neighborhood, would they have thrown him a parade? That reaction tells you everything about what Harlem actually believed about the 1952 conviction. The parade was not for a drug lord coming home. It was for a man the community believed had been railroaded by the federal government. There is one detail in Mayme's autobiography that cuts deeper than any federal charge, and she addressed it with unflinching honesty. Bumpy Johnson's daughter, Elise, was a heroin addict. The man the government accused of flooding Harlem with heroin had a daughter who was destroyed by it. Elias could not hold a job. She turned to shoplifting. She could not raise her own daughter, Margaret. So Bumpy and Mayme took Margaret in and raised her as their own. They enrolled her in one of New York's most prestigious private schools. They gave her the childhood that heroin had stolen from Elias. If you believe the government's version that Bumpy Johnson was a heroin dealer, then this is a story of unspeakable evil. A man who sold the substance that destroyed his own child. But if you believe Mayme's version, that Bumpy's real business was numbers and gambling, and the heroin charge was a federal frame job, then Elise's addiction tells a completely different story. It becomes proof that heroin was the plague that invaded Harlem from the outside, through the Italian mafia's distribution networks, through the French Connection pipeline that was flooding American cities with product the FBN had documented for years, but could not or would not stop. Over 80% of heroin consumed in America during the 1950s and the 1960s originated in southern France and was distributed by the Corsican Mafia through networks that federal agencies were fully aware of. The heroin epidemic got so devastating in Harlem that it reached into Bumpy Johnson's own household and took his own daughter. Then the government turned around and told the world that Bumpy was the one responsible. Elise died in 2006, reportedly from a heart attack linked to decades of substance abuse. Her half-sister Ruthie died the same year. Mayme published the book 2 years later at 93. Mayme died in 2009 at 94. She got the truth onto paper with barely a year to spare. Mayme Johnson's claim about a government setup was not made in a vacuum. It was made in the context of a proven, documented, decades-long pattern of the United States government targeting and destroying black leaders. The FBI program COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program that operated from 1956 to 1971, systematically went after black organizations and leaders using surveillance, planted informants, fabricated evidence, and deliberate campaigns to destroy reputations. Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Fred Hampton, and the Black Panthers were among those targeted. COINTELPRO's stated goal in declassified FBI documents was to prevent the rise of a messiah who could unify and electrify the militant black nationalist movement and to prevent militant black nationalist groups and leaders from gaining respectability. The tools were specific and devastating: perjury, witness harassment, witness intimidation, withholding of exculpatory evidence, fabricated charges, and in some cases, outright assassination. The Church Committee, the Senate investigation that exposed COINTELPRO in the 1970s, concluded that the FBI had conducted a sophisticated vigilante operation aimed squarely at preventing the exercise of First Amendment rights. COINTELPRO officially began in 1956, 4 years after Bumpy's conviction. But the FBI's targeting of black leaders predated the formal program by decades. J. Edgar Hoover had been surveilling black organizations since the 1920s. Harry Anslinger's Federal Bureau of Narcotics had been weaponizing drug charges against black figures since the 1930s. The apparatus of destroying black leaders through drug enforcement was fully operational years before anyone gave it a formal name. Bumpy Johnson's 1952 conviction fits this pattern like a key fits a lock. A powerful black leader who operated outside government control, who commanded community loyalty exceeding any politicians, who could organize, mediate, deliver votes, and mobilize an entire neighborhood. The federal government needed him removed. A gambling charge would not do it. The community did not care about numbers. So you manufacture a heroin conspiracy charge. You convict him. You send him to the worst prison in America. And you let the narrative do the rest. By the time he came home, the story had already been written. He was not the protector of Harlem. He was the man who poisoned it. Decades later, when Hollywood came calling, that story became 6 movies: Shaft, The Cotton Club, Hoodlum, and American Gangster. Every single one was built on the heroin label. The numbers king who kept Harlem safe, who read philosophy, who played chess, who wrote poetry and paid strangers rent, was erased, replaced by a one-dimensional drug lord that Mayme Johnson said never existed. Mayme Johnson died on May 1st, 2009, at 94 years old, of respiratory failure in Philadelphia, far from the Harlem she had loved for most of her life. Her friend Henry Perkins remembered her simply. She was the sweetest woman in the world, but she did not take any nonsense. She had been tickled pink to call herself an author at 93. When all hip-hop asked what she loved most about Bumpy, she gave a one-word answer: everything. Her book is not neutral. She was his wife. She loved him completely. But it is also the only account of Bumpy Johnson written by someone who was actually in the room, who sat at the table, who heard the private conversations, who knew the real names, the real addresses, the real business. Everyone else who told the Bumpy Johnson story, the filmmakers, the federal prosecutors, the journalists, worked with court records, street mythology, and government-approved narratives. Mayme had something none of them had: 20 years married to the man and the knowledge of what his empire actually was. Was Bumpy Johnson a criminal? Absolutely. A gambler, a racketeer, a numbers king, a violent man. Mayme admitted every bit of it. But was he the heroin kingpin the Federal Bureau of Narcotics told you he was? Was he the figure J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI needed you to believe? Was he the man Harry Anslinger and his drug war machine required for their narrative? Was he the man 6 Hollywood movies cemented into American history? According to the only person who truly knew him, the answer is no. The heroin charge was the rap. The numbers empire was the truth. And the fact that America believed the government's version over a wife's tells you everything about how power works in this country. Whose stories get told, whose get buried, and what happens when the people doing the burying have badges, federal budgets, and the entire machinery of the state behind them. Mayme Johnson made sure her version would not stay buried forever. She was 93 years old when she put it in print. That single act of defiance, an old woman in Philadelphia telling the truth about a dead man in Harlem, may have done more to expose the government's war on black leadership than any Senate committee hearing or declassified document ever could. Mayme did not speak in abstractions. She spoke in names, in addresses, in 20 years of dinners, conversations, and a marriage that the federal government tried everything in its power to destroy. They got the conviction, they got the prison sentence, they got the narrative, but they did not get the last word. Mayme did.